Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers is out now, and just like everyone else, the second it dropped, I rushed to listen to it. And there was this period of about an hour and a half or so where everyone was listening to pretty much the same song, plus or minus a track or two, and we were all live reacting at the same time, and it all just felt very, very wholesome. But just like everyone else, after a couple of listens, I have some thoughts. Overall, I thought the album was pretty good. It's I'm not gonna say exactly where I would rank it in terms of Kendrick's discography just yet, and even in terms of other albums I've dropped this year because it is entirely too early, but it is pretty good. Now, off of the first couple listens, it's pretty easy to get a general idea of what the album is about and what some of the themes are. The main thing that I picked up from, like outside of the theme of morality and stepping around issues, is that this really feels like a therapy session for Kendrick. It feels like over the past 5 years since he's dropped Damn, he's spent a lot of time thinking and processing what's going on, which to be fair makes sense because he's had 2 kids since then, and we've had a pandemic. There's been so much happening just in the world. So, Kendrick has a lot on his mind. And whether or not he's actually gone to therapy, that's up to him to disclose. But it really does feel like he's processed all these traumas and issues in his life that may or may not have affected him. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that because it's like just men in general, but more specifically in the Black community, we all just tend to be like, oh no, that's fine. We're gonna ignore that issue. That doesn't hurt me. I'm fine. I'm a man. So we're very trained and programmed to just be, I guess, nonchalant and stoic about everything going on because that's kind of what's expected. And for someone like Kendrick to treat this album like therapy, or to, I mean, he even mentioned therapy on it, so I'm sure he's gone to therapy at this point. Like, it's good because then it's like, oh, well, if someone I look up to, like Kendrick Lamar, can go to therapy and still be considered one of the greatest, like, maybe I can do it too. Aside from the whole therapy session that Kendrick gives us on this project, we get a lot of morals and stepping around things. So the stepping part is probably the thing that we really get into. The morality thing is just kind of something that gets all like thought about throughout the whole thing. Stepping meaning like we're stepping around all these big issues. Like there's major things that get brought up, but we're just like, nah, we're not gonna deal with that. Or it's just things that we know have to be talked about, but we don't want to talk about. And while Kendrick doesn't necessarily get into a whole lot of that on the first half of the project, he really gets into it in the second half, especially with tracks like Auntie Diaries and Mother I Sober. Now, I'm not going to do a whole deep dive in terms of, or in those tracks, or really in terms of any of the tracks, but there's some things that he really, acknowledges and brings up. On the first half, we do get a bit of the morality and more of therapy, I would say, with We Cry Together. And actually, this stepping around issues thing. Like, we have basically an argument between Kendrick and a woman. Well, I mean, we can assume that they were in a relationship at some point. And with this interaction, yes, we're getting a argument between two people in a relationship, but what we're also getting is the idea that maybe there's a child involved and maybe they're listening in on all this. Like, yeah, the whole issue of arguing to like with your significant other it can be traumatic to an extent, and it can be very stressful, and definitely not something that a lot of people bring up. But the fact that there could be a kid involved, like I don't think they necessarily say that, but that's where my mind went first. I'm like, oh shit, like what if there's a kid just in the next room over, or what if they're right there and they're arguing like this? Based on the way the track ends, maybe not, but like, it's something that maybe Kendrick himself has dealt with in the past, and he's just like remembering it and recollecting it. It could also go into the whole thing of hurt people, like he mentioned on the Hard Part 5. Speaking of the Hard Part 5, it honestly, a lot of the things that he touched on works out here too. Because the main thing that I pulled from the Hard Part 5 is that everyone has a different perspective, and Kendrick is trying to address that and understand other people's perspectives. Aside from that, he's also addressing the culture. This culture of, well, hip hop culture specifically, I guess, but also just masculinity in general. Like, because, like I mentioned earlier, men are very trained to be like, oh no, this doesn't bother me, I'm fine, and just kind of keep it pushing. Speaking of perspective, the perspective that we inadvertently get, and I mean, it definitely was intentional, but I feel like it may get glanced over. But I mean, you probably figured it out. But Kodak Black is on this album a lot more than I had expected. Honestly, well, I didn't expect him to be on the album, period. But when I saw the track list, I saw he was on one track. But we hear from him on, I believe, 3 different songs. Now, however you feel about Kodak, that's fine. But in my mind, the reason that Kodak's included is because he's one of those people that has a lot of controversy to him, for just to make it simple, really. And because he has all this controversy around him, people tend to kind of shun him, or they want to cancel him. And however you may feel, that's totally fine. Like, I mean, I personally am not a big fan of Kodak, just in general, but I understand why Kendrick put him on here, because it's perspective and kind of giving him another chance. Like, yeah, we don't necessarily get the perspective of Kodak on this album, aside from his little interludes and talking bits and the track that he's on, but it's still enough, I feel. I feel like someone's probably gonna make this whole album focused and centered around Kodak, and if they do, that'd be insane. But I can totally see it, because the whole morality bit. Also, on this album, there are a few tracks that get pretty heavy. Like I already mentioned, We Cry Together is an intense track. Aside from that, we have Auntie Diaries, which I've seen some discourse about it, and overall, I'm okay with the way that he did it. Obviously, I'm a straight man, so I can't properly say how this may affect people in the LGBTQ community, but I understand the way he did it, and I know why the way he did it. But I get it. I get why people would be or feel some sort of way about it or be offended, because there's a few things in there that are inappropriate, for lack of a better term. But I feel like a lot of people probably understand his approach and why he did it that way, or where he's coming from. It makes sense to me, at least. But however you may feel, I understand. And then we have Mother I Sober, which is crazy because it touches on a lot of trauma in his life, but not trauma that he necessarily himself had suffered, but the trauma that people in his family have suffered. And you don't necessarily realize how much other people's trauma may affect you, because this could kind of go into the whole hurt people thing, like I said earlier, and on the Hard Part 5. Whatever traumas you may have underlying, they might manifest themselves in different ways. And because you feel that you've been hurt in some way, you feel like you may feel obligated to protect people that you love from it. So it makes sense the way that it starts out. But that's also a very heavy and intense track. Personally, if it had ended there, I would not have been surprised in the least, but the way it does end with Mirror is perfect. It makes total sense, because he's basically saying he's doing it for himself, or something along those lines. Or yeah, he says, "I choose me, I'm sorry." So, he's basically like, no, at the end of the day, I'm doing what's best for me. I'm doing what I need to do because, you know, you're probably one of the most important people to yourself. And I mean, even beyond just being like, oh no, I'm choosing myself over everything else. Like that, yeah, you could, oh, that's being selfish. But like, no, like at the end of the day, you need to do what's best for you. You need to do what's best for your mental health. And I feel like overall, that's what Kendrick's trying to get at. Everyone needs to go to therapy. Like everyone's got a lot going on, and it's tough to deal with it alone. Um, but yeah, those are just my thoughts overall. Like I said, the main themes to pick up on, and I will do a proper review for this because there's so much to look into. I don't know if that'll come out next week, but it'll come out eventually. But going back to what I was saying, generally the topics on this album are pretty straightforward. It's essentially a therapy session of sorts. Kendrick's just venting all these thoughts that he's kind of built up over the past few years. But he's also making it normal and making it feel like it's okay to have something wrong with you. And, you know, like at the end of the day, you'll be okay. Like there are people out there who want to help you, and we just, as a whole, have to be kind of accepting of it and okay with it. Like, and to not look down on people who need the extra help because, you know, it's rough. And also there's all these major things that we all step around, like big issues and just things in the world that we're like, oh no, we're not going to address that because it's too intense, or people are too sensitive about it. Like, yeah, no, I get it, but sometimes we have to talk about it. But that's where I'll end it for now. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of this project and what are some major themes that you may have picked up on. And I might have missed something or messed something up entirely, or I could have misread it. So let me know what y'all think. Also, like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Thank you for watching, and please stay safe out there.